The dust cloud rose behind the lone rider like a funeral shroud, and Violet Lawson knew before she even saw the horse stumbling that something was terribly wrong. She had been hanging laundry on the line behind her small homestead when the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention toward the eastern horizon. The July heat of 1878 bore down on Taylor, Texas, with relentless fury, and most sensible folks stayed indoors during the afternoon hours. But Violet had chores that would not wait, and the sight of a rider approaching at such an odd, jerky pace made her drop the wet sheet back into the basket and shade her eyes against the glare. The horse was a fine bay mare, but her gait was all wrong. She moved sideways as much as forward, and the man on her back swayed like a willow in a storm. Violet felt her heart quicken as she watched the scene unfold. The rider seemed to be fighting to stay upright, his body listing dangerously to one side. Then, as if time itself had slowed, the man toppled from his saddle and hit the hard Texas ground with a sickening thud. Violet did not hesitate. She hiked up her skirts and ran toward the fallen rider, her boots kicking up clouds of dirt with each stride. The bay mare had stopped a few yards beyond her fallen master, trembling and wild-eyed. As Violet drew closer, she could see the man lying motionless on his back, his hat having rolled several feet away to reveal dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. "Mister!" she called out as she dropped to her knees beside him. "Mister, can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises the color of winter storm clouds. His face was flushed crimson, and when Violet pressed her palm to his forehead, she recoiled at the burning heat radiating from his skin. Fever. A bad one, by the feel of it. "Hot," the man mumbled, his voice thick and slurred. "So hot." "I know," Violet said, her mind already racing through what needed to be done. "You are burning up with fever. We need to get you inside and cool down." The man tried to sit up, but his strength failed him almost immediately. He collapsed back against the ground with a groan, his eyes squeezing shut. Violet looked toward her small house, then back at the cowboy. He was tall, probably well over 6 feet, and solidly built. There was no way she could carry him on her own. "Can you stand if I help you?" she asked, leaning closer. "My house is just there, maybe 50 yards. We have to get you out of this sun." The man's gray eyes focused on her face with visible effort. "Who?" he started, then swallowed hard. "Who are you?" "My name is Violet Lawson. This is my land you have fallen on, and I aim to help you if you will let me. But first, we need to get you inside before this fever cooks you alive." Something in her tone must have reached through the fog of his illness, because the man nodded weakly. Violet positioned herself beside him and slipped her arm under his shoulders. "On the count of 3, push yourself up. 1, 2, 3. With a tremendous effort, the cowboy managed to get his legs under him. He leaned heavily on Violet, and she staggered under his weight, but managed to keep them both upright. They moved toward the house in an awkward shuffle, Violet bearing as much of his weight as her frame would allow. The man's breath came in ragged gasps against her ear, and she could feel the unnatural heat of his body through their clothing. "Almost there," she encouraged as they reached the porch steps. "Just a few more steps." Getting him up the 3 stairs to her front door proved to be the hardest part. The man's legs seemed to turn to water, and twice Violet thought they would both tumble backward, but somehow, through sheer determination and desperate strength she did not know she possessed, she got him through the door and into her small parlor. Her father's old cot still stood against the far wall, covered with a quilt her mother had made before the consumption took her 5 years ago. Violet steered the cowboy toward it, and he collapsed onto the thin mattress with a groan of relief. His eyes rolled back, and for a terrifying moment, Violet thought he had died, right there in her home. But then his chest rose and fell with a shuddering breath, and she sprang into action. She ran to the kitchen and pumped water into her largest basin, then grabbed every clean cloth she could find. When she returned to the parlor, the man was mumbling incoherently, his head tossing from side to side. Violet set the basin on the small table beside the cot and dipped one of the cloths into the cool water. She wrung it out and placed it gently on the cowboy's burning forehead. He stilled immediately, a soft sigh escaping his cracked lips. "There now," Violet murmured, dipping another cloth and pressing it to his neck. "That should help bring the fever down." She worked methodically, replacing the cloths as they grew warm from his fevered skin, dipping them back in the water and reapplying them. As she worked, she studied the man's face. He was young, probably close to her own 22 years, with strong features and a stubborn jaw. Several days' worth of stubble darkened his cheeks, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow that spoke of an old injury. His clothes marked him as a working cowboy. His shirt was well worn but clean, and his leather vest bore the distinctive marks of long hours in the saddle. His gun belt lay heavy around his hips, and Violet carefully unbuckled it and set it aside on the floor, safely out of reach. Not that she thought he would wake up violent, but her father had taught her to be cautious around strange men, and those lessons had kept her safe in the 3 years since his death. As the afternoon wore on, Violet continued her ministrations. She removed the man's boots and his vest, then unbuttoned his shirt to better cool his chest and neck. His skin was tanned and marked with several scars, evidence of a hard life. She tried not to think about the impropriety of what she was doing. This was a matter of life and death, and propriety could go hang. The man drifted in and out of consciousness as the sun moved across the sky. Sometimes he would mutter words she could not quite make out. Other times he would reach up with fumbling hands as if trying to grab hold of something only he could see. Each time, Violet would gently push his hands back down and replace the cooling cloths. "Hush now," she told him during one particularly agitated spell. "You are safe. Just rest and let the fever break." "Angel," the man suddenly said, his eyes opening to focus on her face with surprising clarity. "You are an angel." Violet felt her cheeks warm at his words. "I am no angel, mister. Just a woman trying to keep you from dying on my floor." But the man's eyes had already closed again, and he subsided back into restless sleep. Violet sat back in her chair and wiped her own forehead with the back of her hand. The house was stifling in the summer heat, and her dress clung to her back with perspiration. But she did not dare leave his side for more than a few moments at a time. As evening approached, Violet lit a lamp and prepared some broth from the chicken she had planned to cook for her own supper. If the cowboy woke, he would need something in his stomach. She also needed to tend to his horse, which she had completely forgotten about in the urgency of caring for her unexpected patient. She found the bay mare grazing on the sparse grass near her small barn. The horse raised her head as Violet approached, her ears swiveling forward with interest. Violet spoke to her in a low, soothing voice as she took hold of the trailing reins. "Your master is in bad shape, girl," she said, leading the mare toward the barn, "but I am doing everything I can for him." She removed the saddle and saddle blanket, noting that both were of good quality, well-maintained and clean. The saddlebags were securely buckled, and Violet debated with herself about whether to look inside. Her curiosity won out over her scruples. If the man died, she needed to know who he was so she could notify his family. Inside the left saddlebag, she found a clean shirt, a tin of coffee, and some jerky wrapped in cloth. The right bag held ammunition for his pistol, a small Bible with a worn leather cover, and a letter addressed to Ethan Russell, care of the Running W Ranch near San Antonio. The letter was unopened, and Violet carefully tucked it back where she had found it. Ethan Russell. So, now she had a name to go with the face. After settling the mare in a stall with fresh water and some hay, Violet carried the saddlebags back to the house. Full darkness had fallen, and the temperature had finally started to drop to something approaching bearable. She checked on Ethan and found him sleeping more peacefully than before. His skin still felt too warm, but not as frighteningly hot as it had been when he first fell. Violet allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Perhaps he would survive after all. She pulled her chair closer to the cot and settled in for what she knew would be a long night. She could not risk sleeping while his fever still raged. If it spiked again, or if he took a turn for the worse, she needed to be awake and ready to help. The hours crept by slowly. Violet alternated between cooling Ethan's brow with fresh cloths and checking his pulse at his wrist. Sometimes she read passages from his Bible by lamplight, finding comfort in the familiar verses her own mother used to read to her. Other times she simply sat and listened to him breathe, praying silently that each breath would not be his last. Near midnight, Ethan's eyes opened again. This time they seemed more focused, more aware of his surroundings. "Where?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where am I?" Violet quickly poured some water from her pitcher into a tin cup and brought it to his lips. "You are in my home, about 3 miles east of Taylor. You fell from your horse this afternoon. Do you remember?" Ethan sipped the water gratefully, though his hands shook too much to hold the cup himself. When he had drunk his fill, he let his head fall back against the thin pillow. "Fever?" he said. "Had it for days. Thought I could make it to San Antonio before it got too bad." "Well, you thought wrong," Violet said, her tone sharp with worry. "You nearly died out there in my yard. What possessed you to keep riding when you were so sick?" A ghost of a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Stubborn, I guess. Always have been. Stubborn is one word for it. Foolish is another." Violet dipped a fresh cloth and placed it on his forehead. "You have been burning up with fever for hours now. What started it? Do you know?" Ethan's brow furrowed as he thought. "Got caught in a storm a few days back. Creek was swollen from rain upstream, and my horse spooked. We both ended up in the water. By the time I got to shore, I was soaked to the bone and shaking with cold. Woke up the next morning feeling poorly, but I had to keep moving." "Why?" Violet asked. "What was so important that you could not rest and recover?" But Ethan's eyes had closed again, and he did not answer. Violet sighed and continued her vigil. At least now she knew what had caused the fever. A dunking in cold water followed by exposure and exhaustion was a recipe for illness. She had seen it before, most notably when her father had fallen sick after working in the rain to repair their barn roof. He had recovered eventually, though it had taken weeks. The night wore on. Violet dozed fitfully in her chair, jerking awake every time Ethan stirred or made a sound. By the time the first gray light of dawn crept through her windows, she felt wrung out and exhausted. But Ethan's fever had finally broken. His skin was cool and damp with healthy sweat, and his breathing had evened out into the deep, regular rhythm of genuine sleep. Violet allowed herself to relax for the first time in nearly 12 hours. She stood and stretched, feeling her spine pop in several places. Her dress was wrinkled beyond recognition, and she was fairly certain she looked like something the cat dragged in. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that Ethan Russell was going to live. She made herself some coffee and scrambled eggs, eating standing up at her kitchen counter while she kept one eye on her patient. When she had finished, she washed her face and changed into a fresh dress, feeling slightly more human. Then she heated up the broth she had made the night before and returned to the parlor to wait for Ethan to wake. He did so around mid-morning, his eyes opening slowly and blinking against the light streaming through the window. This time, when he looked at Violet, his gaze was clear and focused. "You are the woman from yesterday," he said, his voice still rough but much stronger than before. "The one who helped me. Violet Lawson," she confirmed. "And you are Ethan Russell, unless I miss my guess. I found a letter in your saddlebag with that name on it." "Guilty as charged." Ethan tried to sit up, but Violet quickly moved to stop him. "Not so fast. You have been very sick, and you need to take it slow. Here, let me help you." She arranged the pillows behind him so he could sit propped up against the wall. He winced as he moved, and she could tell his body was sore from the fall and the fever. But his color was better, and when she touched his forehead briefly, it was blessedly cool. "I brought you some broth," Violet said, retrieving the bowl from the kitchen. "You need to eat something and rebuild your strength." Ethan accepted the bowl with trembling hands, and Violet noticed that he could barely manage to bring the spoon to his lips. Without thinking, she took the bowl and spoon back from him. "Here, let me," she said, and began to feed him as if he were a child. To his credit, Ethan did not protest, though she could see the embarrassment coloring his cheeks. He ate slowly, taking small sips of the broth between long pauses. When he had finished about half the bowl, he shook his head. "That is all I can manage right now," he said. "But thank you. I feel more human already." Violet set the bowl aside and sat back in her chair. Now that the immediate crisis had passed, she found herself curious about this stranger who had literally fallen into her life. "You said you were headed to San Antonio," she prompted. "What takes you there?" Ethan's expression grew somber. "Work, hopefully. I have been working on a ranch up near Fort Worth for the past 2 years, but the owner sold out to a bigger outfit. They brought in their own men and let most of us go. I heard the Running W Ranch outside San Antonio was hiring, so I figured I would head down that way and try my luck." "That is a long ride, especially in this heat," Violet observed. "You must need the work pretty badly to risk traveling alone in your condition." "I did not have much choice," Ethan said with a shrug. "I am not the kind of man who can sit idle. I need to work, need to be useful, and I have some obligations that require a steady income." There was something in the way he said it that made Violet curious, but she did not press. Everyone had their private business, and she respected that. Instead, she changed the subject. Well, you were not riding anywhere for at least a few days. That fever took a lot out of you, and you need time to recover your strength. You are welcome to stay here until you are well enough to travel. Ethan looked at her with surprise. That is very generous of you, Miss Lawson, but I could not impose on your hospitality like that. You have already done more than enough by saving my life. Nonsense, Violet said firmly. You would not make it half a mile down the road before you collapsed again. Besides, I have the space, and I could use the company. It gets lonely out here by myself. She had not meant to say that last part, and she felt her cheeks warm at the admission. But it was true. Since her father's death, she had been alone on this small homestead, struggling to keep it running and make ends meet. She sold eggs in town and took in mending when she could get it, but it was a hard, lonely existence. Ethan studied her face for a long moment. You live here alone? He asked carefully. No husband or family? My father died 3 years ago, Violet said, lifting her chin slightly. It was just the two of us after my mother passed when I was 17. He left me this land and the house, and I have managed on my own since then. She expected to see pity in Ethan's eyes, but instead, she saw respect. That takes courage, he said quietly. Not many women could survive out here alone. You must be very strong. Violet felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. I do what I have to do, she said simply. Same as anyone. They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, and then Ethan's eyes began to droop. The effort of eating and talking had exhausted him, and Violet could see him fighting to stay awake. Rest now, she said gently. I will be here if you need anything. Angel, Ethan murmured as his eyes closed. I called you an angel yesterday. I remember now. I am no angel, Violet repeated, but she said it with a smile this time. You are to me, Ethan said, and then he was asleep. Violet sat watching him for a while, her mind turning over everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She had always been practical and level-headed, not given to flights of fancy or romantic notions. But there was something about Ethan Russell that intrigued her, something beyond the simple fact that she had saved his life. She shook her head at her own foolishness. He was a stranger passing through, nothing more. Once he recovered, he would continue on to San Antonio and his new job, and she would return to her quiet, lonely life. There was no sense in letting her imagination run wild, but as she went about her daily chores over the next few hours, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the man sleeping in her parlor. The next 3 days fell into a comfortable rhythm. Ethan's strength returned gradually, and by the second day, he was able to sit up and feed himself. By the third day, he was insisting on getting out of bed, despite Violet's protests. I have been lying around like an invalid for long enough, he said, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. I need to move around or I will go crazy. Violet sighed, but did not argue. She knew from experience that men made terrible patients. She helped him to his feet, steadying him when he swayed slightly. Together, they walked slowly around the small parlor, Ethan leaning on her arm for support. Your house is very neat, Ethan observed as they made their second circuit. Everything has its place. My mother taught me that a clean house makes for a clear mind, Violet said. I have tried to keep up her standards, though sometimes it feels like a losing battle against the dust. Ethan smiled at that. The dust is eternal in Texas. I think it will still be here long after we are all gone. They walked a few more turns around the room before Ethan admitted he needed to rest again. Violet helped him back to the cot, and he sat down heavily, breathing harder than the small exertion warranted. I hate being weak, he said, frustration clear in his voice. I am used to working from sunup to sundown. This feels like being trapped in my own body. You will be back to full strength soon enough, Violet assured him, but you have to be patient and let yourself heal. You were very sick, Ethan. These things take time. It was the first time she had used his given name, and she saw his eyes widen slightly at the familiarity. But he did not object. Instead, he reached out and took her hand in his. Thank you, he said quietly. For everything? I know I have already said it, but I need you to understand how much it means. You saved my life, Violet. I would have died out there if you had not found me. Violet felt her heart skip at the touch of his hand. His palm was rough and calloused from years of hard work, but his grip was gentle. She looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift inside her chest. Anyone would have done the same, she said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. No, Ethan said firmly. Not everyone. Some folks would have passed right by and left me to my fate. But you stopped. You helped. That says something about who you are. They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped, eyes locked. Then Violet gently pulled away, suddenly aware of how fast her heart was beating. I should start on supper, she said, standing quickly. You must be hungry. If Ethan noticed her flustered state, he was kind enough not to mention it. He simply nodded and leaned back against his pillows, watching her retreat to the kitchen with an unreadable expression on his face. That evening, they ate together at Violet's small kitchen table. She had made chicken and dumplings, and Ethan ate with the hearty appetite of a man on the mend. As they ate, they talked, and Violet found herself telling him things she had not spoken about in years. She told him about her childhood, about how her parents had come to Texas with dreams of farming and making a better life. She told him about her mother's illness and death, and how her father had never quite recovered from the loss. She told him about the struggles of keeping the homestead going, about the neighbors who had tried to buy her land for pennies on the dollar after her father died, assuming a young woman alone could not possibly manage. But you proved them wrong, Ethan said, his eyes warm with admiration. I am still proving them wrong, Violet corrected with a wry smile. Every day I wake up and this place is still mine is a small victory. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I understand that. The need to prove yourself, to show the world that you are more than what they think you are. I have felt that way my whole life. Tell me about yourself, Violet said, leaning forward with interest. You know all about me now. It is only fair. Ethan took a long drink of water, gathering his thoughts. Not much to tell, really. I grew up on a small ranch outside of Austin. My father was a hard man, quick with his fists and slow with praise. My mother died when I was 10, and after that, things got worse. I left home when I was 16 and have been working ranches ever since. Do you have any siblings? Violet asked. A younger sister, Ethan said, and his expression softened. Sarah, she is 18 now, living with our aunt in Houston. I send her money when I can to help with her expenses. She wants to be a teacher, and I am determined to help her get the education she needs. That is why you need the job in San Antonio, Violet said, understanding dawning. The obligations you mentioned. Ethan nodded. Sarah is smart, smarter than I will ever be. She deserves a chance at a better life than the one we grew up with. If I can give her that, then all the hard work and long days will be worth it. Violet felt her heart swell with respect for this man. He was not riding to San Antonio for himself, but for his sister. The love and devotion in his voice when he spoke of Sarah told her everything she needed to know about Ethan Russell's character. She is lucky to have a brother like you, Violet said softly. Ethan met her eyes across the table. And I am lucky to have met a woman like you, he said. These past few days, talking with you, getting to know you, it has meant more to me than you probably realize. I have spent so much of my life alone, moving from place to place, never really settling anywhere. But here, with you, I feel something I have not felt in a long time. What is that? Violet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Peace, Ethan said simply. And something else, something I am almost afraid to name. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken words. Violet felt her breath catch in her throat as Ethan stood and came around the table to where she sat. He held out his hand, and after only a moment's hesitation, she took it and let him pull her to her feet. They stood close together, so close that Violet could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. She could smell the soap she had given him to wash with, mixed with something that was uniquely him. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she wondered if he could hear it in the quiet of the kitchen. Violet, Ethan said, his voice low and rough with emotion. I know I have no right to say this. I know I should get well and ride on and leave you to your life, but I cannot seem to make myself want to do that. These few days with you have shown me something I did not even know I was looking for. What? Violet asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. A reason to stay in one place, Ethan said. A reason to stop running. A reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have something more than a bedroll and a lonely campfire. Violet felt tears prick at her eyes. Ethan, she started, but he gently placed a finger against her lips. Let me finish, he said. I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few days, but I have never been one to deny the truth when it is staring me in the face. And the truth is, I am falling in love with you, Violet Lawson. I think I started falling the moment I opened my eyes and saw you cooling my brow, looking at me like I was worth saving. A tear escaped and rolled down Violet's cheek. You are worth saving, she said fiercely. You are worth so much more than you know. Then give me a chance to prove it, Ethan said. Let me stay. Let me court you properly. I will still go to San Antonio and get that job. But I will come back. I will come back to you, and we can see where this leads. I will not rush you or push you, but I am asking you to give us a chance. Violet searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or false promises. But all she saw was honesty and hope, and a yearning that matched her own. She had been alone for so long, had convinced herself that she was content with her solitary life. But now, looking into Ethan's eyes, she realized that she had just been surviving, not living. And here was a man offering her the chance to do more than survive. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Ethan. I will give us a chance. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out after a storm. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close against his chest. Violet wrapped her arms around his waist and let herself lean into him, feeling safe and cherished in a way she had not felt since her father died. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other in the warm lamplight of the kitchen. No more words were needed. Everything they wanted to say was communicated in the embrace, in the gentle way Ethan stroked her hair, in the way Violet's fingers clutched at his shirt. Finally, reluctantly, they pulled apart. Ethan kept hold of her hands, rubbing his thumbs across her knuckles in a gesture that was both comforting and intimate. I should probably sleep in the barn from now on, he said with obvious reluctance. It would not be proper for me to continue staying in your house now that I am well enough to move around. Violet nodded, even though the thought of him leaving the house made her heart ache. You are probably right. People talk in small towns, and I would not want your reputation or mine to suffer. Then it is settled, Ethan said. Tomorrow I will move my things to the barn. But tonight, if it is all right with you, I would like to sit with you a while longer. We can talk, or just enjoy the quiet together. I would like that very much, Violet said. They returned to the parlor and sat together on the small settee that had belonged to Violet's mother. It was barely big enough for two people, which meant they had to sit close, their shoulders touching. Violet found she did not mind in the least. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Ethan told her about the places he had been, the ranches he had worked, the vast skies and open spaces that had been his home for so many years. Violet told him about her dreams of expanding her homestead, of maybe getting some cattle or planting a bigger garden. They were simple dreams, but Ethan listened to each one as if it were the most important thing in the world. As midnight approached, Violet found herself fighting to keep her eyes open. The stress and worry of the past few days were catching up with her, and exhaustion pulled at her like a weight. You should sleep, Ethan said gently, noticing her struggle. You have been taking care of me and neglecting yourself. That ends now. From here on out, I take care of myself, and I help you with whatever you need. You are still recovering, Violet protested weakly. I am well enough, Ethan said firmly. And I meant what I said. I want to help you, Violet. Let me. Too tired to argue, Violet nodded. Ethan walked her to her bedroom door, which was just off the parlor. He stopped outside and brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Sleep well, Angel, he said softly. Violet felt her heart flutter at the endearment. Good night, Ethan. She closed the door and leaned against it, listening to his footsteps as he returned to the cot in the parlor. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed, but sleep did not come immediately. Her mind was too full of everything that had happened, everything that had been said. She replayed the feel of Ethan's arms around her, the look in his eyes when he said he was falling in love with her. Was it too fast? Was she being foolish to trust her heart after knowing him such a short time? Perhaps. But she had learned in her years alone that life was uncertain and short. Her parents' deaths had taught her that tomorrow was never guaranteed. If she had a chance at happiness, at love, she would be a fool not to take it. With that thought comforting her, Violet finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning, Ethan was true to his word. He moved his few belongings out to the barn and made himself a comfortable spot in the hayloft. Violet protested that it was too rough, but Ethan just laughed. I have slept in far worse places, he assured her. Besides, I will be spending my days with you. I only need the barn for sleeping. And so began the happiest weeks of Violet's life. Ethan was still not strong enough for heavy labor, but he helped where he could. He repaired the broken hinges on the barn door that Violet had been meaning to fix for months. He patched a hole in the roof of the chicken coop. He weeded the garden and hauled water and did 100 small tasks that Violet had been struggling to keep up with on her own. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch and watch the sun set over the Texas plains. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's company. Ethan would tell her stories about his travels, and Violet would share memories of her parents and her childhood. One evening, about 2 weeks after Ethan had first fallen from his horse, he reached over and took her hand as they sat on the porch. The gesture had become natural between them, this simple act of connection. But tonight, there was something different in his touch, something more intentional. I need to leave for San Antonio in a few days, he said quietly. I am well enough now, and I have delayed long enough. The job might be gone if I wait much longer. Violet felt her heart sink, even though she had known this moment was coming. I understand, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But I meant what I said, Ethan continued, squeezing her hand. I will come back. As soon as I secure the job and figure out the lay of the land, I will come back to you. It might take a few weeks, maybe a month, but I will return. Will you wait for me? Violet turned to look at him, seeing the anxiety in his eyes. He was afraid she would say no, afraid that she would change her mind once he was gone, but she had no intention of doing either. I will wait, she said firmly. I will be right here, Ethan, and I will count the days until you return. The relief on his face was palpable. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it tenderly. I do not deserve you, he said, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. You already are, Violet whispered. The night before Ethan was to leave, they sat together on the porch until well past midnight. Neither wanted the evening to end, knowing that dawn would bring separation. Finally, reluctantly, they said their goodnights. But before Ethan could turn to go to the barn, Violet stopped him. Wait, she said, and before she could lose her nerve, she stood on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was a chaste kiss, brief and sweet, but it held all the promise of what could be between them. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Ethan's eyes were dark with emotion. Violet, he said, his voice rough. Something to remember me by, she said softly. While you were gone? Ethan cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. As if I could ever forget you, he said. You have marked my heart, Violet Lawson. It belongs to you now, whether you want it or not. I want it, Violet said, and I am trusting you with mine. They kissed again, longer this time, deeper. Violet felt herself melting against him, her fingers tangling in his hair. This was what she had been missing, what she had not even known she needed. Not just companionship, but this fire, this passion, this sense of rightness that came from being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both of them were trembling. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. I should go, he said, though he made no move to leave. If I do not go now, I might not be able to. Violet nodded, understanding what he was not saying. They were balanced on the edge of something profound, and it would be so easy to tumble over. But they both knew it was not the right time, not yet. There were promises to be kept, and distances to be crossed first. Go, Violet said, stepping back reluctantly, and come back to me soon. Count on it, Ethan said. He kissed her once more, quick and hard, and then he was gone, striding toward the barn before either of them could change their minds. Violet stood on the porch for a long time, her fingers pressed to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Tomorrow he would leave, and she would be alone again. But this time, it would be different. This time, she would have hope to sustain her, and the promise of his return to look forward to. The morning came too quickly. Violet rose early and made Ethan a hearty breakfast, packing extra food in his saddlebags for the journey. His bay mare was well rested and eager to be on the road again. Ethan packed his few belongings with practiced efficiency, checking and rechecking everything to make sure he had not forgotten anything. When everything was ready, he led his horse to where Violet stood waiting by the porch. She had put on her best dress, a pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Ethan looked at her as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. "I hate goodbyes," he said quietly. "Then do not say goodbye," Violet replied. "Say I will see you soon instead." A smile tugged at Ethan's lips. "I will see you soon, Violet Lawson. That is a promise." "I am going to hold you to it, Ethan Russell." He pulled her into his arms one last time, holding her tight. Violet breathed in his scent, committing it to memory. Then, before she could start crying, she pulled back and gave him a gentle push toward his horse. "Go on now, before I convince you to stay." Ethan swung up into the saddle with an ease that showed how much his strength had returned. He looked down at her, his gray eyes intense. "I love you, Violet. I know I have not said it in so many words before, but I need you to hear it now. I love you, and I am coming back to build a life with you if you will have me." Violet felt tears spill over onto her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, Ethan. I will be waiting." With one last long look, Ethan turned his horse toward the road. Violet watched him ride away, her hand raised in farewell. She stood there long after he had disappeared over the horizon, the dust from his horse's hooves the only evidence he had been there at all. The days that followed were harder than Violet had anticipated. She had gotten used to Ethan's presence, to the sound of his voice and the comfort of his company. The homestead felt empty without him, and the nights were especially lonely. She threw herself into her work, keeping busy from dawn to dusk to avoid thinking about how much she missed him. But the nights were long, and in the darkness, doubt would sometimes creep in. What if he did not come back? What if he changed his mind once he was away from her? What if something happened to him on the road? The fears would chase themselves around in her head until she felt sick with worry. To occupy her mind, she began working on improving the house. She patched the holes in the plaster and whitewashed the walls. She mended curtains and beat rugs and scrubbed floors until everything gleamed. If Ethan was coming back, she wanted the homestead to look its best. 3 weeks after Ethan left, Violet made the trip into Taylor to sell her eggs and pick up some supplies. The general store was busy, and she had to wait her turn at the counter. While she waited, she overheard 2 women talking near the fabric display. "Did you hear about that woman out east of town?" one of them said in a loud whisper. "The Lawson girl? Apparently she had a man living with her for near about 2 weeks. Scandalous, if you ask me." Violet felt her face burn with anger and embarrassment. She wanted to march over and tell those women the truth, that Ethan had been sick and she had been caring for him, that nothing improper had happened. But she knew it would do no good. People believed what they wanted to believe, and small-town gossip was a powerful force. She completed her business at the store as quickly as possible and left without speaking to anyone. On the ride back to her homestead, she fumed about the injustice of it. She had done nothing wrong, had in fact saved a man's life, and yet people were ready to assume the worst about her. But by the time she reached home, her anger had cooled to a dull ache. She realized that she did not care what people thought. Let them gossip. She knew the truth, and so did Ethan. That was all that mattered. 4 weeks passed, then 5. Violet tried not to worry, tried to trust that Ethan would keep his promise. But with each day that passed without word from him, her anxiety grew. Had something happened? Had he been hurt, or worse? Or had he simply decided that she was not worth the trouble of coming back? Then, on a hot afternoon in late August, Violet was in the garden pulling weeds when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Her heart leaped into her throat as she straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun. A rider was approaching from the west, and even from a distance she recognized the bay mare and the man sitting tall in the saddle. Ethan had come back. Violet dropped her gardening tools and ran to meet him, not caring about dignity or propriety. Ethan swung down from his horse before it had fully stopped and caught her up in his arms, spinning her around. Violet laughed and cried at the same time, holding on to him as if she would never let go. "You came back," she said against his shoulder. "You really came back." "Did you doubt me?" Ethan asked, setting her down but not releasing her from his embrace. "Maybe a little," Violet admitted. "It has been so long." "I know, and I'm sorry for that. It took longer than I expected to get everything sorted out. But I have news, Violet. Good news." They walked hand in hand back to the house, Ethan's horse following behind them. Once they were inside, Ethan told her everything that had happened since he left. He had made it to San Antonio and secured the job at the Running W Ranch. The pay was good, and the work was steady. But more importantly, he had talked to the ranch owner about his situation, about the woman he loved back in Taylor and his desire to be near her. The owner, a widower himself who understood matters of the heart, had been sympathetic. "He is willing to let me work a different arrangement," Ethan explained, his eyes shining with excitement. "I will work the ranch for 3 weeks out of every month, but I get 1 week free to come back here. It is not perfect, but it means I can court you properly and still send money to my sister." Violet felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "That is wonderful, Ethan. Truly wonderful." "There is more," Ethan said, taking her hands in his. "I have been saving every penny I can. It will take time, maybe a year or more, but I want to save enough so that I can buy some land near here, start my own small ranch. I want to build a life here, Violet, with you at the center of it, if that is what you want too." "It is," Violet said without hesitation. "It is exactly what I want." Ethan pulled her close and kissed her, and Violet felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. All the lonely weeks, all the doubt and fear, melted away in the warmth of his embrace. He had come back, just as he promised. He loved her, and he wanted to build a future with her. "There is one more thing," Ethan said when they finally broke apart. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "It is not much, but I wanted to give you something to show how serious I am about us." He opened the pouch and shook out a delicate silver ring with a small blue stone set in the center. It was simple and beautiful, and Violet gasped when she saw it. "It is turquoise," Ethan explained. "My mother had a ring like this, and I always loved how the stone matched her eyes. When I saw this in a shop in San Antonio, I thought of you. Your eyes are not blue, but there is something about this stone that reminded me of you, its strength and beauty." Violet could not speak. She watched through tear-blurred eyes as Ethan knelt before her on one knee, still holding the ring. "Violet Lawson, I know I am asking you to take a chance on a wandering cowboy with more dreams than money. I know I cannot give you much right now, except my heart and my promise to work hard and love you every day for the rest of my life. But if you will have me, if you will agree to be my wife, I swear I will spend every moment proving that I am worthy of you." "Yes," Violet said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Ethan, I will marry you." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion and tenderness that left her breathless. They decided to wait until the following spring to marry, giving Ethan time to save more money and make arrangements with the ranch. It also gave Violet time to prepare, though in truth, she would have married him that very day if circumstances allowed. The months that followed fell into a pattern. Ethan would work at the Running W for 3 weeks, then ride back to Taylor to spend a week with Violet. During his visits, he continued to help around the homestead, making improvements and repairs. He built a new chicken coop that was twice the size of the old one. He repaired the barn and added a small corral for the horses. He even started clearing land for a future house, one that would be theirs together. When he was away, Violet kept herself busy. She continued selling eggs in town, holding her head high in the face of continued gossip. She also started taking in more mending work and even began making quilts to sell. The extra income would help when they were married, and it gave her something productive to focus on during the long weeks when Ethan was gone. They wrote letters to each other, though neither was particularly skilled with words on paper. Ethan's letters were short and to the point, usually just a few lines telling her he was well and thinking of her. But Violet treasured each one, reading them over and over until the paper was soft and creased from handling. Winter came, mild by northern standards, but still cold enough to make the nights uncomfortable. During Ethan's December visit, they sat together by the fire, wrapped in blankets and talking about their future. "I have been thinking," Ethan said, his arm around Violet's shoulders. "Once we are married, what if I brought my sister Sarah here to live with us? She could finish her education in Taylor, and we could save the money I have been sending to our aunt. It would help us build up our savings faster." Violet considered this. She had never met Sarah, but from everything Ethan had told her, she sounded like a sweet and intelligent young woman. "I think that is a wonderful idea," she said. "I would love to meet her and have her here with us. This house is small, but I could convert the back room into a proper bedroom for her." Ethan's face lit up with relief and joy. "You truly would not mind? I know it is a lot to ask, taking in my sister on top of everything else." "Family is never a burden," Violet said firmly. She is important to you, which makes her important to me. Besides, I have always wanted a sister. It will be nice to have another woman around. Ethan kissed her temple, pulling her closer. How did I get so lucky to find you? I think we found each other, Violet said, and I thank God every day that you fell from your horse in my yard. Ethan laughed at that. It was not my finest moment, but I cannot argue with the results. Christmas came, and Ethan stayed an extra few days beyond his usual week. They decorated the small house with pine branches and made simple gifts for each other. Violet knitted Ethan a warm scarf in deep blue wool. Ethan carved Violet a beautiful wooden box with her initials on the lid, perfect for storing her precious letters and mementos. On Christmas morning, they attended services at the small church in Taylor. It was Violet's first time bringing Ethan to town, and she was nervous about the reception they would receive. But to her surprise, most people were polite, if a bit reserved. The pastor, a kind man named Reverend Michaels, warmly welcomed Ethan and made a point of congratulating them on their engagement. After the service, Violet introduced Ethan to some of her neighbors, including the elderly Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house in town. Mrs. Patterson studied Ethan with sharp eyes, and then, apparently satisfied with what she saw, she patted his arm and told Violet she had chosen well. Coming from Mrs. Patterson, whose opinion carried weight in Taylor, it was high praise indeed. On the ride back to the homestead, Violet felt lighter than she had in weeks. That went better than I expected, she admitted to Ethan. People just needed to see us together, Ethan said, to see that this is real and serious, not some scandal to gossip about. Now that they have met me and know our intentions are honorable, the talk will die down. He was right. Over the following weeks, Violet noticed a change in how people treated her in town. The sideways glances and whispered comments lessened. People began greeting her normally again, some even asking about her wedding plans. It seemed that an engagement and a ring on her finger had made all the difference in the eyes of Taylor's citizens. January and February passed in a blur of preparation. Violet sewed herself a wedding dress, working on it in the evenings by lamplight. It was simple but beautiful, made of cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She also began sewing curtains and linens for their future home, dreaming of the day when she and Ethan would no longer have to say goodbye. In March, Ethan brought Sarah with him on his visit. Violet had been nervous about meeting her soon-to-be sister-in-law, but her fears evaporated the moment Sarah climbed down from the wagon. She was a lovely girl with dark hair and bright, intelligent eyes. She rushed forward and embraced Violet as if they were already family. "I am so happy to finally meet you," Sarah said, her eyes shining with genuine warmth. "Ethan has told me so much about you in his letters. I feel like I know you already." "I am happy to meet you too," Violet said, returning the embrace. "Welcome to what will soon be your home." The three of them spent the next few days getting to know each other. Sarah was everything Ethan had described and more. She was kind, thoughtful, and eager to help. She admired the homestead and told Violet about her dreams of becoming a teacher. By the time the visit ended, Violet loved Sarah like the sister she had never had. "She is wonderful," Violet told Ethan, as they stood together on the porch the night before he and Sarah were to leave. "I am so glad she will be living with us." "She loves you too," Ethan said. "I could tell. She's usually shy around new people, but with you, she was completely herself. You have a way of making people feel safe and welcome, Violet. It is one of the many things I love about you." April arrived, bringing warmer weather and wildflowers blooming across the Texas plains. The wedding was set for the first Sunday in May, and as the day approached, Violet felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She wanted everything to be perfect, not for show, but because this day represented the beginning of the life she had dreamed about during all those lonely months. The day before the wedding, Ethan arrived with a wagon full of his belongings and a surprise. He had managed to save enough money to make a down payment on 20 acres adjacent to Violet's land. It was not much, but it was a start, a foundation they could build on together. "This is ours now," he said, his arm around Violet as they stood looking out over the newly acquired land. "Yours and mine. We can build our own place here, raise cattle, maybe even grow some crops. The possibilities are endless." Violet leaned against him, overwhelmed with emotion. "I cannot believe this is really happening," she said. "Sometimes I still feel like I am dreaming, and I will wake up and you will be gone. I am not going anywhere, Ethan said firmly. I am here, and I am yours, for the rest of our lives. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. Violet woke before sunrise, too excited to sleep. She took extra care with her appearance, pinning up her hair and putting on her new dress. When she looked at herself in the small mirror her mother had left her, she barely recognized the radiant woman looking back. Mrs. Patterson and several other ladies from town came out to help Violet prepare and to witness the ceremony. Reverend Michaels arrived mid-morning, and by noon, everything was ready. The ceremony would take place in Violet's front yard, under the shade of the old oak tree her father had planted when they first settled the land. Sarah helped Violet with the final touches, adjusting her dress and tucking a few wildflowers into her hair. You look beautiful, Sarah said, her eyes misting with tears. Ethan is not going to be able to take his eyes off you. When the time came, Violet walked out of the house and saw Ethan standing under the oak tree, waiting for her. He wore his best clothes, and his dark hair was neatly combed, but it was the look on his face that took her breath away. He looked at her as if she were the most beautiful, most precious thing he had ever seen. Violet walked toward him, her heart full to bursting. When she reached his side, he took her hand and squeezed it gently. You are stunning, he whispered. You clean up pretty well yourself, Violet whispered back, making him smile. Reverend Michaels began the ceremony, his voice strong and clear in the quiet morning air. He spoke about love and commitment, about the sacred bond of marriage and the responsibilities it entailed. But Violet barely heard the words. She was too focused on Ethan, on the way he held her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world, on the love and promise she saw in his eyes. When it came time for the vows, Ethan's voice was steady and sure. I, Ethan Russell, take you, Violet Lawson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. This is my solemn vow. Violet repeated the words, her voice thick with emotion. I, Violet Lawson, take you, Ethan Russell, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts us. This is my solemn vow. Ethan placed a simple gold band on her finger, next to the turquoise ring he had given her months before. Violet slipped a matching gold band onto his finger, and then Reverend Michaels was pronouncing them husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, the Reverend said with a warm smile. Ethan needed no further encouragement. He cupped Violet's face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. The small gathering of witnesses applauded, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling so hard their faces hurt. They celebrated with a simple meal prepared by the ladies of the church. There was fried chicken and fresh bread, potato salad and apple pie. Everyone ate and laughed and shared stories. It was a modest affair, but to Violet, it was perfect. As the sun began to set, the guests departed, leaving Ethan, Violet, and Sarah alone. Sarah had already moved her things into the back room, and she tactfully excused herself for the evening, giving the newlyweds privacy. Ethan and Violet stood together on the porch, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Ethan's arm was around her waist, and Violet leaned into him, feeling complete in a way she had never felt before. Hello, Mrs. Russell, Ethan said softly. Hello, Mr. Russell, Violet replied, smiling up at him. I love you, Ethan said. I have said it before, but I want to say it again as your husband. I love you, Violet, with everything I am. I love you too, Violet said, and I am so grateful that fever brought you to my door. Ethan laughed at that. It was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if it did not feel like it at the time. Falling from that horse, burning up with fever, thinking I might die. And then I opened my eyes and saw you, cooling my brow with such gentle hands. I thought you were an angel, sent to carry me to heaven. But I was not an angel, Violet said, just a woman trying to save a life. You saved more than my life, Ethan said seriously. You saved my soul, Violet. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to believe that I could have a home and a family and a future. You gave me hope. Violet felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. You gave me the same thing. She said, I was so lonely before you came. I told myself I was content, but I was just going through the motions, surviving but not truly living. You showed me what it means to be alive again. They stood together in the gathering darkness, holding each other close. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges, joys and sorrows. But they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The weeks and months that followed were full of hard work and deep happiness. Ethan officially gave his notice at the Running W Ranch, thanking the owner for his kindness, but explaining that he wanted to focus on building his own place. With the money he had saved, plus what Violet had put aside, they had enough to purchase a small herd of cattle and the materials to build a modest house on their new land. Ethan and Violet worked side by side, clearing land and laying the foundation for their home. Sarah helped where she could, though she also began attending the small school in Taylor, preparing to become a teacher herself someday. In the evenings, the three of them would sit together, tired but content, planning for the future. By the end of the summer, the house was finished. It was simple, just 3 rooms and a loft, but it was sturdy and well built, and most importantly, it was theirs. They moved in on a warm September evening, carrying their few belongings across the threshold of their new home. "What do you think?" Ethan asked, watching Violet as she looked around the empty main room. "I think it is perfect," Violet said. "It is ours, and we built it together. What could be better than that?" They furnished the house slowly, piece by piece. Ethan built a table and chairs from lumber he purchased in town. Violet sewed curtains and cushions, bringing warmth and color to the rooms. Sarah painted wildflowers on the wooden panels of her loft bedroom, turning it into a cheerful space that reflected her bright spirit. By winter, the house felt like a home. They had chickens in a coop behind the house and a small vegetable garden that had produced well, despite being planted late in the season. Their cattle grazed on the combined acreage of their land, and Ethan was already talking about expanding the herd in the spring. One cold December night, as they sat together by the fire, Violet told Ethan the news she had been hoping for since their wedding day. She was going to have a baby. Ethan's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. His face lit up with joy, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the finest porcelain. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "In June, the doctor thinks," Violet said, laughing at his stunned expression. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to describe it," Ethan said. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child, yours and mine, I can hardly believe it." Sarah was equally thrilled at the news. She immediately began planning and preparing, talking about how she would help care for the baby and teach it to read as soon as it was old enough. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon all 3 of them were caught up in the excitement of the impending arrival. The winter passed peacefully. Ethan was attentive and protective, not letting Violet do any heavy work and insisting she rest more than usual. Violet found his hovering both annoying and endearing, but she loved him for it. She had never felt so cherished, so valued. Spring brought new life to the land and new challenges as well. A late frost threatened their young crops, and one of their cows fell ill and had to be nursed back to health. But they handled each challenge together, their bond growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. As Violet's pregnancy progressed, she grew larger and more uncomfortable in the Texas heat. Ethan did everything he could to make her comfortable, bringing her cool drinks and fanning her when the temperature became unbearable. On the hardest days, when she was tired and swollen and missing her mother terribly, Ethan would hold her and remind her that it would all be worth it when they held their child. The baby came on a warm June evening, right on schedule. Mrs. Patterson and the doctor came out from town to attend the birth, while Ethan paced anxiously outside with Sarah. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan thought he might go mad from worry. But finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky gold and pink, he heard the unmistakable cry of a newborn baby. A few minutes later, Mrs. Patterson emerged from the bedroom with a wide smile. "You have a healthy son, Mr. Russell," she said, "and your wife is tired but well. You can go in and see them now." Ethan barely remembered crossing the room. All he could focus on was Violet, propped up in their bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. When he reached her side, she pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny, perfect face. "Meet your son," Violet said softly. Ethan looked down at the baby and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it almost frightened him. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving tiny fists in the air, clearly unimpressed with being born. "He is perfect," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. He is absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold him? Violet asked. With trembling hands, Ethan took his son from Violet's arms. The baby was so small, so fragile, and Ethan marveled that something so tiny could be so important. He looked up at Violet with tears streaming down his face. Thank you, he said. Thank you for this incredible gift. They named the baby William, after Violet's father. Little William Russell was a healthy, happy baby who seemed content with his lot in life. He rarely cried and slept well, allowing his exhausted parents to recover from the ordeal of his birth. Sarah was an adoring aunt, constantly wanting to hold and rock the baby. She sang to him and told him stories, and William would stare up at her with wide, wondering eyes, as if taking in every word. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and tiny milestones. William's first smile, his first laugh, the day he rolled over by himself. Each moment was precious, and Ethan and Violet savored every one of them. By the time William was 6 months old, the ranch was thriving. They had added more cattle to their herd and were making plans to build a proper barn. Money was still tight, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching William play on a blanket with wooden blocks Ethan had carved for him, Violet leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. "Do you remember the day you fell from your horse?" she asked. "How could I forget?" Ethan replied with a smile. "It was the most important day of my life. I was so scared when I saw you lying there," Violet said. "I thought you might die before I could even get you to the house." "But you did not let that happen," Ethan said, taking her hand. "You saved me, Violet. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Violet corrected. "I was lost before you came, Ethan. I was alone and trying to convince myself that I was fine. But I was not fine. I was just existing, day to day, with no real purpose or joy. You gave me all of that." "And you gave me a home," Ethan said. "A family. A reason to wake up every morning with a smile on my face. You gave me everything I did not even know I needed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset and their son play. Sarah came out to join them, settling into her own chair with a book. The evening air was warm and filled with the sound of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. This was happiness, Violet thought. This quiet moment with the people she loved most in the world. This simple, ordinary evening that was actually extraordinary in its perfection. As the years passed, their family grew. William gained a sister, Emma, 2 years after his birth, and another brother, Jacob, 3 years after that. The house had to be expanded twice to accommodate their growing family, and the ranch grew along with it. They added more cattle, then some horses, and eventually, they were one of the most prosperous small ranches in the county. Sarah achieved her dream of becoming a teacher, taking a position at the Taylor School where she had once been a student. She remained close to Ethan and Violet, often bringing her students out to the ranch for lessons about nature and animal husbandry. She eventually married a kind young man named Thomas, a clerk at the general store, and built a house just a few miles away from Ethan and Violet's ranch. William, Emma, and Jacob grew up healthy and happy, running wild across the ranch land and learning the value of hard work from their parents. They had their mother's determination and their father's steady nature, and both Ethan and Violet were proud of the people their children were becoming. Through all the years and all the changes, Ethan and Violet's love only grew stronger. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative. They had faced droughts and disease, financial struggles, and family crises. But through it all, they had faced everything together, side by side, just as they had promised on their wedding day. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Violet with a trip to San Antonio. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch and the children for more than a day, and Violet was nervous about leaving. But Sarah and Thomas offered to watch the children, and Ethan insisted they deserved a proper celebration. They stayed at a fine hotel, dined at restaurants with white tablecloths, and walked through the streets hand in hand like young sweethearts. On their last evening, Ethan took Violet to a jeweler and bought her a beautiful gold locket. "For carrying the pictures of our children," he explained as he fastened it around her neck, "so they are always close to your heart." Violet touched the locket, tears pricking her eyes. "You give me too much," she said. "I could never give you as much as you have given me," Ethan said. "You gave me a life worth living, Violet. You gave me everything." They stood together on the hotel balcony, watching the sun set over the city, wrapped in each other's arms. Violet thought back to that hot July day when a fevered cowboy had fallen from his horse into her life. She thought about how terrified she had been, how uncertain about the future. She never could have imagined then where that day would lead, how that one moment of compassion would change her entire life. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, sensing her reflective mood. "About the day we met," Violet said. "About how scared I was and how I did not know if you would survive. About how I called you an angel and you insisted I was no such thing." Ethan smiled at the memory. "I still think you are an angel," he said. "My angel. The one who saved me and loved me and made me believe in miracles." "If I am an angel, then you are mine as well," Violet said, "because you saved me just as surely as I saved you." They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Two souls who had found each other against all odds. Two hearts that had been made whole by love. 20 years after Ethan's first fall from his horse, they stood together on the porch of their now substantial ranch house, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. William had married and had 3 children of his own. Emma was married to a doctor in town and had just welcomed her first baby. Jacob was following in his father's footsteps, learning to run the ranch that would one day be his. Ethan's hair had gone gray at the temples, and Violet's face showed the lines of years well lived. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, falling in love in the heat of a Texas summer. "Have you ever regretted it?" Ethan asked suddenly. "Marrying a fevered cowboy who fell off his horse onto your land?" Violet laughed, the sound as bright and clear as it had been 2 decades ago. "Not for a single moment," she said. "That fevered cowboy was the best thing that ever happened to me. Even when I was at my worst, sick and helpless and needing you to cool my brow. Especially then," Violet said, "because that was when I first saw who you really were. Not a strong, capable cowboy, but a vulnerable human being who needed help. And when I helped you, when I cooled your brow and saw you through that fever, I started to fall in love with you. Every moment after that just made me fall harder." Ethan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I love you, Violet Russell. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Ethan Russell, my cowboy, my angel, my everything." They stood together as the evening deepened into night, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together. The ranch, the house, their children and grandchildren, all of it had sprung from that one moment when a sick man had fallen from his horse and a compassionate woman had refused to let him die. It had been the beginning of everything, and as they stood there, holding each other in the gathering darkness, they knew that their story was far from over. There would be more years, more memories, more moments of joy and sorrow, and everything in between, but they would face it all together, just as they always had. Hand in hand, heart to heart, 2 souls united by love and bound by promises kept. The cowboy who had fallen from his horse with a fever, and the woman who had cooled his brow and become his angel, had found their happily ever after, and it was better than either of them had ever dared to dream. Their love story would be told for generations in Taylor, becoming part of the town's history. The story of how Ethan Russell fell ill and nearly died, only to be saved by Violet Lawson's kindness and nursing. How he called her his angel, and how that angel had stolen his heart. How they had built a life together from nothing but love and determination, creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered across the Texas plains and the stars shone bright overhead, you could still find them on their porch, holding hands and watching the world go by. 2 people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for, and more than they had ever hoped to find. Their story was one of faith and courage, of compassion and commitment, and most of all, of a love that had started with a fevered cowboy, a cooling cloth, and a word whispered in delirium. Angel. It was a fitting description after all, for the woman who had saved not just a life, but a soul, and who had found her own salvation in the process. Together, Ethan and Violet Russell had created something beautiful out of an accident and a fever, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last for all eternity.